Our next speaker is Anisa, and she will be presenting on use of vtreat for R package and regression modeling.
Okay, so I decided to do a presentation. I work for a large life healthcare group, and it's a hospital group, and we wanted to examine basically if we can relate the profit in our hospitals to operational metrics. So my boss asked me to do a regression model, and I thought it was hopeless, and there was no way that you could do that, and the results were actually quite surprising. Okay. So the R packages used in the regression modeling were vtreat, primarily for the cross-validation, because there were very few data points, and I used K-way unstratified cross-validation. MGZV, because I used GAM modeling. And then standardize, I used it just to check if standardizing variables would actually help. Okay, so the problem was create a statistical regression model that relates acute hospital profit per day to operational influences. The data was actually very small because there's 43 acute hospitals over 3 years, and that was 129 data rows. However, there were tons of different metrics that we tried. And related to everything from the age of the doctors in the hospital to more global metrics, which actually proved quite statistically significant. The intention was to make, however, even though there were lots of metrics, a very parsimonious model that could cater for the diversity of experience across the hospitals and across time. So the whole intention of this model wasn't really to predict what was going to happen in the future. It was more to actually explain. So that was quite important. So even though I used cross-validation because there was a small amount of points, we didn't really worry if it overfitted. We just wanted to see that there were actually relationships. Another thing is that we wanted to see, because there are certain variables that would be determined by the head office in terms of like the size of the hospital and how the hospital is staffed and how it caters for the demographics around the hospital. And then there were the day-to-day running and the efficiencies of the hospital were delivered by the hospital manager. So we wanted to separate those two things, so to get variables that would actually say these are not within the hospital manager's control, so we can evaluate his effectiveness versus the head office decisions. And then what happens a lot in businesses, whether it be corporates, banks, whatever kind of business, is that there's a heavy reliance on the budget as the only model of financial performance. And we wanted to introduce everyone to a sort of statistical model of evaluating performance. All right, so the process was to generate a linear regression model first to check the statistically significant variables, and then proceed with the GAM. So this just shows a basic analysis. This is occupancy, so it's basically bums and beds. And network revenue versus operating profit, this is something decided at the head office. So it basically says how much what deals we strike with Discovery and the different funders to actually put people into the hospital. And then medical days versus operating profit would be, actually shows like a case mix. So it's whether it's a patient receives a medical procedure or a surgical procedure. Okay, so this was a summary of the linear model, and it's actually not too bad in terms of, fit. So I think it was around 84% R squared, and it showed occupancy, medical per day, and network revenue all to be fairly significant. And then these are the plots of the residuals. Okay. All right, then the GAM also showed okay, but the case mix variable was less significant. And then this just shows some interesting GAM plots, because what the GAM does is that it generalizes the covariates to try and predict, and it shows us really struggling with the medical per day. Okay, so this is just the final slide in terms of just showing the prediction around occupancy, which proved the most significant. Next steps, so there were some outliers in terms of loss-making points, and you could see that in the residual plots. They were sort of like distorting the fit. So it's an experiment with the interaction terms for GAM because there's a lot you can do with that. And then present the results in a non-offensive manner, so accountants don't get too pissed off. And then try and say whether you can actually use it as what is it for? Target profit, measure performance, and strategically manage hospitals in the way that I discussed.